It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with Chief Conversationalist Thomas Senna. Featuring Matt Ardill. And special guest,
Gary Seith.
And now, curator of the hall, JD.
Thank you so much, Doug Danatz. It is my pleasure to be here with you all at the SNL Hall of Fame in the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. My name is JD, and we are just about ready to walk inside. But before we do, I'm going to just wipe my feet. It's autumn. You never know what's lurking in those fallen leaves if you live in a four-season area. At any rate, we've got a great show for you today. We have invited Gary Seith to join us from the Not Ready for Prime Time podcast, where they what they essentially do is go through every podcast and every episode, rather, of the first 5 seasons of SNL. And it's a real blast. It's a blast from the past. And there's always good guests on it as well. So give that a listen. But today you're going to hear Gary wax poetic about writer Alan Zweibel. And that should be real good. Thomas is down in the conversation room now. But before we get to that, let's go to our friend Matt in his Minutia Minute and get a little bit of trivia on Mr. Zweibel. Matt, how are you doing?
Hey, JD. I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I am great. Thanks for asking.
Cool. So you want to get started?
Let's do this. Alan Zweibel.
All right. Alan Zweibel, height unknown, very private fellow. He was actually one of my more difficult digs. His birthday is May 20th, 1950. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, but grew up in Wantagh and Woodmere on Long Island, like Colin Jost and Pete Davidson, one of the esteemed Long Islanders. Hey, maybe they'll go in and go splitsies on a ferry. You never know. He attended George W. Hewitt High School, going on to attend the University of Buffalo, graduating in 1972.
Good God. That's years ago.
He's a fresh college grad when he started at the show. He holds 27 writing credits, 13 producing credits, 7 acting credits, and 1 directing credit. These credits include working on Gilda Live, It's Gary Shandling's Show, and the underrated film Dragnet, starring Tom Hanks.
Right.
And everybody's favorite Canadian, Dan Aykroyd.
Yes. I remember
He is the author of 14 books, ranging from comedy memoirs to touching personal stories to stories for kids. These include Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier, North, and of course, Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of love story, where he discusses his close friendship with the incredibly talented Gilda Radner.
Yeah. Gone too soon.
Now, in addition to books and television, he's written for the stage. 3 of his writing credits for the stage have landed on Broadway.
Wow.
Gilda Live, 700 Sundays, which starred Billy Crystal and won the 2005 Tony, and Martin Short, Fame Becomes Me, another amazing Canadian. He's also appeared on screen and stage. He appeared as himself on Letterman. Curb Your Enthusiasm, once again, as himself. And he is a member of the Triad Theater in New York. He's won lots of awards. He's won Emmys for outstanding comedy writing outstanding writing in a comedy, variety, or music series or special in 1977 and 1978. He's also won 6 Cable Ace Awards and 3 Writers Guilds of America Awards. Upon graduation, he actually got his start in comedy by selling jokes. He wrote jokes for other people. Yeah, at $7 a pop. If I had known that, I'd probably have like maybe $14. I don't know. I wouldn't be doing as well as he did.
Yeah.
He got his gig at SNL by showing Lorne his portfolio of 1,100 jokes
Wow.
that he penned and sold to other people. He was hired on the spot.
That's so cool.
Now he's currently working on an adaptation of Barry Sonnenfeld's memoir, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother. And I'm hoping we see him in some way, shape, or form on this 50th anniversary year.
Me too. Well, what do you say we go downstairs to Thomas and give their conversation, Thomas and Gary, a listen?
All right, I can't wait to hear it.
Thomas, take it away.
All right, Matthew R. Dill and JD, thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, and welcome to the conversation portion of the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Today we are celebrating a category that I think a lot of us really agree has just been so overlooked. As far as SNL Hall of Fame voting, it could be overlooked by fans, viewers. I'm talking about the writing category. And we're talking today about a writer that joined the show in season 1 in its original run. So very instrumental to the history of the show, had a really great partnership with a legend on the show that we'll get into. Of course, I am talking about Alan Zweibel. He's our nominee today for the SNL Hall of Fame. And joining me to talk about Zweibel, Gary Seath, one half of the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. Much as I tried this past season to stage a coup, it is still Gary and Brad's show. It is not my show yet. So, Gary Seath, thank you. Not yet.
Thomas, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I am very unprepared. I thought we were talking about Alan Zweibel's time as a featured performer in season 5, and we were just going to focus on that. So I am woefully unprepared. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, this would be the easy, 5-minute podcast. Let's go. What do you got for us? Alan Zweibel is a featured player. No, he was. No, technically Zweibel was part of the cast. If you look up the cast alphabetically, Alan's the last one.
Yes, he is. He was on 4 or 5 episodes of the 5th season.
Mm-hmm.
So, but before that, like you said, one of the original writers hired in May of 1975. I love Alan Zweibel. I think he is a super talented writer. And I think if we were talking, overall career of the original writers, he probably had the most prolific writing career after SNL.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he won 5 Emmys, a Tony, a bunch of Writers Guild awards, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Writers Guild. He's super talented. So I'm very excited to talk about Alan Zweibel.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you cover the original run, the first golden era of SNL that Alan Zweibel was a part of. And I know you guys just wrapped up coverage of season 3. How was that, watching season 3, and what kind of can we look forward to on your show?
Yes, we just wrapped up season 3. It was interesting having watched all of these, these past 60 some episodes that we've done. I walked away from season 3 having learned a lot, which I didn't think was possible. We went into season 3 with a lot of hype and very high expectations, because you think of season 3 as like, oh, they've turned this corner, they've got this budget, everything is kind of, hitting its groove now. And I found it to be more uneven than I was expecting it to be. So it was a lot of fun to watch and kind of take a step back and say like, oh, it didn't hit on every episode, but it's a lot of fun to watch still. And it was a great season to talk about, I think, for me and Brett, because there was so much back and forth of like, wait, you liked that? You didn't? Stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. And yeah, like you said, we just wrapped up season 3 last week. So it was a lot of fun. It was a good one.
I noticed that, you set your kind of expectations maybe before you covered the first episode. You're like, season 3, this is the big one. We know we have an episode, the Steve Martin episode, that's like maybe the greatest episode of all time. And then it was fun to see you guys kind of go through the season, and you're like, there were certain episodes that just didn't hit, certain bits, certain nights that they just weren't feeling it. So that was an interesting kind of journey that we took with you guys.
Yeah, well, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us on a couple of episodes this year. It's always fun, and it's interesting when you haven't watched these things all the way through in so long, so you kind of forget. And I don't know that I've ever watched them all in order like this either. I definitely am used to cherry picking what I watch. So, I mean, if folks want to go back and watch something from the 3rd season, they should watch the Steve Martin Blues Brothers episode. That episode is amazing. It's so good and packed with so much classic sketches that we had to break it into 2 parts because we just had so much to say, and we were fortunate enough to have some interesting people join us on those episodes too. Some former writers and band members, so that was cool.
Yeah, Paul Schaefer. That was a great get. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Paul Schaefer, Lou Marini, and Marilyn Suzanne Miller all joined us. So that was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then so you guys on the Not Ready for Primetime podcast, what can we look forward to? Are you taking a little break between covering season 4?
We're going to take a little bit of a break before we jump into season 4, but we have some fun interviews with folks about some of the writers. We interview Dennis Perrin about Michael O'Donoghue. We interviewed Daniel Divizet about the Blues Brothers. He just wrote a Blues Brothers book. And then we're going to speak again with with Jeff Hill and Doug Weingrad about their book and kind of get into a little more detailed nitty-gritty than we have with them in the past. So just some straight interview shows for a few weeks, and then we're going to dive into season 4 later in November.
That sounds awesome. I'm your British correspondent. I look forward to maybe coming back for a few, or at least maybe a couple season 4 episodes.
Yeah. You're definitely in there for a couple. It'll be great.
Wonderful. So listen, the Not Ready for Primetime podcast, that's Gary Seath and Brad Robinson, wherever you get your podcast, a really great deep dive and look into the original golden era of SNL. So today, talking Alan Zweibel, an influential writer at SNL. So he started at the beginning of season 1. They hired him on before season 1. He was there throughout the entire original run, as Gary said, a featured player in season 5. He came back a little bit and lent his hand a little bit after season 5, but he's really synonymous with seasons 1 through 5. He had an interesting journey to SNL. He did some stand-up sets. He was from Catch a Rising Star. He and Billy Crystal kind of worked together, carpooled apparently together to Catch a Rising Star. He was spotted by Lorne, and Gary, SNL was Alan's first real writing job. Like, this was what SNL was in 1975. Here's your first writing job, my friend.
And it's interesting. I listened to an interview with Alan talk about getting this gig, and he said he was on at Catch, and he said he bombed, and he just went back to the bar to wait for Billy. Like he said, Billy Crystal would carpool with him. He was waiting for Billy, and Lorne Michaels comes up and introduces himself there and asks him if he wrote the stuff that he just did, and Alan says yes, and then they meet, and he said he gave Lorne a book of like 1,100 jokes because he had been working in the Catskills for a long time, like writing jokes for old timers, and he'd get paid by the joke. And he kept this notebook that he said had around 1,100 jokes of all of the jokes he'd ever written, either for himself or other performers. And he gave it to Lorne, and Lorne opened it up, looked at one joke, said, closed it. And then he didn't hear anything for a while. And just as an aside, so this is a guy who's working in a deli, living with his parents. He's 25 years old, and he gets the same week, he gets a call to say, all right, we want to hire you for Saturday Night Live. He tells the story that he also was given an offer that same week to work on Hollywood Squares as Paul Lynde's writer. And he had this decision. Like, do I move to LA and work on this primetime show that's on its 9th season and it's very established? Or do I go work on this show that no one has heard of, that is not really a show yet, that airs at 11:30 on Saturday nights? And he talked to his mother, who said, well, which one would be more fun? And he was like, well, I think this Saturday night show would be more fun. And that's how he did it and found his way to Saturday Night Live. It's crazy.
Crazy. And he definitely was getting paid peanuts. He was getting crap salary. Like all of them, I think, were when the show started.
I think so, but because he was so new and it was his first, professional writing gig, he and Franken and Davis were kind of the low men on the totem pole. And I think he was a little higher than Franken and Davis because they apparently had to split a salary at first. Yep. And so he was a little bit better than that. But yeah, he was the new kid on the block.
Yeah, and even Herb Sargent had to take a salary cut. He wasn't making what he was worth. Definitely, he really did Lorne a favor and took a giant salary cut. So that's the way it was back then. Lorne had to make do. He had to find kids who bombed at Catch a Rising Star and he saw talent in them. So that's just what Lorne and them had to do in the original run.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say it worked out. All of their sacrifices for their salaries worked out for everybody.
Yeah, definitely seemed like it. And it seemed like some of the writers came into the show pretty confident, like maybe bordering on cocky. You have your O'Donohues. I think Franken and Davis came in like that. But I've heard and read some conflicting things about Zweibel there. And it seemed like maybe from what I read, he was maybe a little unsure of his place on the writing staff. But as far as like what was his confidence level and his place, do you think, when he joined the writing staff?
I think from what I've heard and read, when he first joined the writing staff, he was very unsure of himself and kind of, he's 25, so he's not that much younger than some of the other, more quote unquote established people. But when you have someone, or I guess two people, right? Like Michael O'Donohue and Chevy Chase, these two guys who are huge personalities, and they're both writers, and they come in and they're just kind of, they see these young guys that are maybe a little nervous and unstable, and they just poke at them. And there are stories of them, just messing with Franken and Davis and Zweibel constantly, and just kind of, going at them, talking. I think one of the lines I read from O'Donohue was he brought up how much they made, and his response was, "My cat makes more money than that." And so these guys, I think Zweibel, from what I've read, he came in a little nervous and unsure of himself. And it kind of, the more he got on air and the more, his jokes were kind of accepted at read-throughs and stuff, he kind of gained his footing a little bit faster, I think, than maybe you would have expected him to.
Yeah, and he had an advocate, too, on the cast. So it seemed like Gilda, right, kind of spotted Alan and said, like, hey, do you want to write with me? Right? Well, is that kind of how that story goes?
Yeah, this story, the way he tells the story is lovely. And to listen to old interviews, or I guess not old, sorry, to listen to newer interviews with Alan Zweibel, and he talks about his relationship with Gilda and how they were just so connected from the beginning. And he talks about at the first meeting of the staff and cast, they're in Lorne's office and they're all supposed to be pitching story ideas and, ideas for sketches. And he was so nervous that he just kind of ducked behind this plant in the corner of Lorne's office. And he was just kind of like keeping to himself, head down, being nervous in the corner. And then he hears a woman's voice say, can you help me be a parakeet? And he's kind of startled. He's like, what? And Gilda says, well, I think it would be really funny if I sat on a perch and I can scrunch up my face like a parakeet, but I don't know what a parakeet would say. Are you a good parakeet writer? And Zweibel tells the story. He's like, of course, I love parakeets. And he's like, I had no idea what the hell to say. And she says, why are you back behind a plant? Are you nervous? And he said, well, yeah, this is my first job. I'm very nervous. And she said, well, I am too. Is there room back there for me? And the way he tells the story, that was it. They was just kind of like, they were connected right away. And now Gilda is Gilda, right? So she's, she hasn't been on TV yet, but she's still quite the performer, and everyone already loves her and is just kind of enthralled with her presence. And for her to, see this guy who's definitely feeling nervous and crouching behind a plant, and her willingness to go over and talk to him, I think that shows a lot about Gilda's character. And the way that they connected so fast, just kind of, it helped both of them, I think. At the beginning of the show, at the very beginning of everything, all of a sudden they knew they had each other's backs, which apparently, that relationship formed very quickly. So that, yes, he had a huge advocate in the cast.
Yeah, it's almost like Zweibel was, the new kid at school, even though, they were all the new kid at school,
right.
But it was almost like he was the kid who transferred to a new school, and Gilda was the person who was already knew the ropes, was kind of part of the in crowd, and spotted him and was like, all right, kid, you're coming with me. I'm going to help you feel comfortable, taking you under my wing. Like, what a great hearted person. That's why people felt so connected to Gilda. It's just kind of that type of thing. Like, we felt like we knew her, even though she passed when I was like 6 or 7. But just watching her old material, you feel a connection with Gilda. And Zweibel said he felt that right away.
Oh yeah, and he's talked about how, like everyone else, he was in love with Gilda because she was just that, like, everyone just you met Gilda, you knew Gilda, you fell in love with her, and she made it very clear. They made it very clear that it was a platonic relationship, and it was one that they maintained up until Gilda's death. She was the godmother to a couple of Zweibel's kids, maybe all 3. I don't remember off the top of my head. And they maintained this friendship and this closeness that he wrote about in a book that he wrote about their relationship called Bunny Bunny, and then later turned it into a play. And it's still a relationship that, listening to Zweibel talk now, was so meaningful for him in his entire life, throughout his life. It's one of his deepest relationships.
Yeah, he calls them platonic lovers. I've heard him.
Yes,
him refer to her or them as like platonic lovers, and of course, like, yes, I had a crush on Gilda, but it was never gonna happen. But she was just like they were his kids called her Aunt Gilda and everything. So just what a special bond that they had, and they worked on. And I know you and Brad put yourselves in the position of watching these old episodes back to back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
So the character I'm about to bring up is kind of funny that way, but Emily Latilla.
Yeah.
So Zweibel and Gilda worked on Emily Latilla.
I say there should be more violins on television and less game shows. It's terrible the way things...
Miss Latilla, that was violence on television, not violins. Violence.
Oh, well, that's different.
Yes.
Never mind.
How would you classify kind of Emily Latilla, that character's place in the show around that time?
Well, Emily Latilla is one of the first recurring characters that really the audience falls in love with when they see her the first few times. And it's become such a recognizable character. It helped kind of give Gilda something to anchor to it seemed like every week, although it was, every few shows or whatever. And for a stretch, it was every week. It gave her and Jane time together alone on camera. So it was just the 2 women with this back and forth, which I think was great at the time for both of them to be on camera more, just the 2 of them. But really, I think it was that recognition of, this is a character, we know what her thing is, and it's really funny, and we love the way that Gilda delivers this character, because she's playing an old lady, but she's not all dressed up in makeup. It's just she puts her hair in a bun and puts glasses on, and we know that that's what she's going for. So the performance is brilliant. And the way in which Gilda and Zweibel came up with the character and then kind of molded it, I think you see their collaboration very early on in the show's life. And it kind of, I think that was kind of a big spark for them of like, oh, we did this. We came up with this character that we can continue to move forward and get on air.
There was a lot of, it happens so many times. SNL, even the best characters, like Matt Foley, for instance. We talked about Matt Foley in our Odenkirk episode. There were Matt Foleys that didn't hit. They're just
Right.
The first one was great. Everybody remembers that. But then there were diminishing returns, but we still love him. And I think Emily Latella, especially for the first, the early years of SNL, it's probably the same way. They found something, and then of course, like, things are going to have some diminishing returns, but still it was like Zweibel's writing with Gilda, her playing Emily, like something really obviously seemed to hit if they were on almost episode after episode. I don't think they skipped more than 2 or 3 episodes for a long time there.
Right. And especially in season 2, it was kind of like something that they held on to there because they had it and they could. And it filled space, and it was something that people liked. And because of both the writing and the performing, it's not like it was just filler.
One other thing that I found interesting, very early on, they were experimenting with Gilda kind of doing these segments on home base, just her kind of talking. And one of them was like what Gilda ate.
And then at lunch, I had a half a club sandwich, but I took out the middle piece of bread and I left the crust. But I traded the other half for a half of a Western omelet with cheese. And then I finished before everyone else, so I had a roll with butter and 3 French fries off of somebody else's plate and a tab. But I didn't order dessert. But on the way back to the office, I had a Fig Newton and an Almond Joy candy bar. And then when I got back to the office, I told everyone I was going to the bathroom, but I really went to a coffee shop and had apple pie a la mode, and I ate the whole thing. And on the way back up...
I think that was a really neat thing to get the cast out there as themselves and just kind of like talk for a few minutes. And I know Alan and Gilda, and I think Lauren helped contribute to some of these, but it's like an interesting little experiment that they had with Gilda there early on.
Yeah, I think it was Lauren wanted to get the cast out there as themselves every now and then so that people could meet the cast and know who they are. And so Alan and Gilda came up with this What Gilda Ate thing, where she just comes out on a stool and sits down and then goes through everything that she ate throughout the day. And it's one of those things that, Thomas, if I sat down and told you what I ate, you would be so bored and you'd be like, Gary, this is crazy. But when someone like Gilda does it, right, she has this presence. And the fact that Zweibel knows how lovable she is and how she comes across on camera to everyone. And so he can say, we'll talk about the apple you ate and then how you ate this, this cake and then the sandwich and whatever. And it just, it works on so many levels. It's really a funny bit.
Yeah, people will be watching and be like, oh, I enjoy Apple. I enjoy what Gilda, I have something in common with Gilda.
Right.
Just the way she delivers it, the way she comes across on camera. I think honestly, like, even though it's not like a pure comedic segment, I would like to see sometimes like even the current cast members kind of sit there and talk. Like, we get some of that on Update, but I think on home base, them doing little things similar to that would go a long way for like introducing. I mean, we have Ashley Padilla and Jane Wickline and Emil Joachim Reich this season as newcomers. Let's meet them in that way.
Oh, I totally agree. Even if it were, well, now we're getting into the current day, but whatever. Even if it were like an online bit that you did just to introduce the cast of like, and it's so simple because everybody, well, most people eat something every day. And if you just, talk about that, I don't know that anyone could do it like Gilda, but something innocuous like that, right? It could be a lot of fun for people you don't know.
Right, totally. He helped her with Emily Latella. There was another one. We'll stick on Gilda here at the top.
Yeah.
Another one, Rosanna Dana, which Gilda came up with, but Alan was instrumental in telling her how to present Rosanna Dana.
Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey writes in and says, Dear Rosanna Dana, last Thursday I quit smoking. Now I'm depressed, I gained weight, my face broke out, I'm nauseous, I'm constipated, my feet swelled, my gums are bleeding, my sinuses are clogged, I got heartburn, I'm cranky, and I have gas. What should I do? Mr. Fader, you sound like a real attractive guy. You belong in New Jersey.
Again, Alan tells these stories of how, as she kind of came up with this character and she wanted to kind of flesh it out more. And so the two of them they kind of made a little ritual of going out for food and coming up with the Rosanna Dana character. And he was kind of helping her with more of the mannerisms and stuff for this character, I've read. And I think this is another example of where they knew they had something good with Emily Latilla. They kind of watched it run its course and they were like, well, what else can we do? And they came up with a very different character that they could do similar things with at the Weekend Update desk. And she would have, she would have a rhythm and a cadence to everything that she was doing. So the way in which Zweibel wrote these bits and Gilda then performed them, you knew exactly what you were getting after the first 2 or 3 with Roseannadanna's, but they were so funny and so well performed and so well written that it's a lot of fun. And that's another story he tells where when it would come time to write for Roseannadanna, they would go out for dinner on like a Wednesday night or whatever, come up with ideas. He would go back to the office to write. She would go out and she would call him and check in at like 1 or 2 in the morning. And then the next day she would come to the office. He would give her the legal pad with everything he'd written. She'd give it back with marked up in red with notes. He would get so angry. He would make notes on her notes and they would go back and forth. And he said it got to the point where they would get so frustrated with one another by the time they were done writing a Roseannadanna piece that they were happy to see it on air because it would be done and they could move on.
Yeah.
And then they would be fine again on Monday, right? But I think it was a lot of fun and also frustrating for the two of them to write this character.
Yeah. Sometimes you almost kind of, you write it so well that now Lorne and the producers expect, like, give us another one, give us another Roseannadanna. So I could see how that's like a monkey paw kind of situation.
Yes.
In a way, like, I want to hit, but yeah, but we all loved Roseannadanna. And then Baba Wawa is another one that he and Gilda worked on together.
Dr. Kissinger, you once said that power is the greatest aphrodisiac. What exactly do you mean by this?
Well, have you ever started a nuclear warhead?
Once. When I was working on a white paper report on nuclear proliferation. Dr. Kissinger, in a previous interview with the Italian Barbara Wawa, Oriana Faraci, or whatever her name is, you refer to yourself as a gunswinger, sort of a Lone Ranger of foreign policy.
This was an impression that Gilda kind of had in her back pocket. And again, it's one that he helped her kind of flesh out and make more, I guess, exaggerated. But he took it up a few notches with her to make it more pronounced.
And that's a lot of the stuff that we don't see a writer do necessarily behind the scenes. Their job is to, maybe sometimes the performer has this character in mind, but she doesn't know, they don't know. Like with Roseannadanna, oh, well, Alan said maybe this should be on Weekend Update. I think this would work really well on Update. That was Alan's idea. Or maybe they'll just sprinkle in, like, instead of saying it this way, throw in this word, or wait a few beats because it'll make it funnier. There's just like certain like intangible things that we don't see that someone like Alan sitting there with Gilda just peppering with like just making it better and so that's like I think that maybe that's sometimes why writers, especially with our voters, sometimes seem to get overlooked because it's a lot of stuff that it's hard to put your finger on. But I know Alan did a lot of that stuff for Gilda.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just Gilda that he did these things for. He wrote all of the samurai sketches after the first one. So it wasn't his idea and his concept, but he took it and ran with it. And this is a really good point where Zweibel was kind of unique in his place in the writer's room in that in those early years, you had some very polarizing writers in the room, some folks who didn't necessarily get along all of the time. And it seems like Zweibel was one of the ones who he could work with Franken and Davis. He could work with Anne and Rosie and Marilyn and Suzanne and bounce around, work with Schiller on things and flesh out the samurai. He actually, the Chico Escuela character, right? This was a character that was, I think Brian Doyle Murray was the one that, came up with the character and the concept. And like you were saying with Roseannadanna, Zweibel was the one that was like, this could work really well at Weekend Update. And this character will have a home in Weekend Update if you can, find a way to have him speak straight to the audience in this setting. And it's because he was kind of, I think he was a kind of, I guess, the glue, like the cohesive unit in the writer's room of someone who's willing to go and work with other people on their ideas and help them punch them up. And so you, like you're saying, you don't know all of what goes in or what goes on in the writer's room. So when it comes to voting for the Hall of Fame, it's all of these intangibles that we're not aware of. But I think Zweibel is one of the people that has, he's connected to so many things, whether it's directly or indirectly, of just, helping people punch things up. He did a lot of work on Weekend Update.
Right. Yeah.
A lot with Herb Sargent, a lot on his own that went on air. His first joke that Lauren read from his 1100 jokes was one of the first, it's the postage stamp joke.
The post office announced today, just a second, I lost my place. Oh, the post office announced today that it is going to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States. It's a 10-cent stamp, but if you want to lick it, it's a quarter.
This was the joke that Lauren was like, all right, I like this guy. He has the sensibilities for what I'm looking for in this show, right? Is what Lauren's thinking. That was his first joke. It got on the first episode, and it was one of the bigger laughs from Weekend Update in the first episode from the audience. And so I think that's the kind of thing where you see Zweibel and you listen to Zweibel talk and you don't really realize how his mind works, because he's all over the place and he can help everyone on the staff and also like punch up Weekend Update jokes with Herb Sargent or write a bunch of jokes so Herb doesn't have to write everything. He's all over the place.
Yeah, that joke, and I bet his thousands of jokes in that book, very Borscht Belt, very Catskills comedians, and I know Lauren likes that type of stuff. He really enjoyed that type of stuff, so I bet that's the type of thing that endeared him to Zweibel. And speaking to the points that we were just making, it's like I've heard Zweibel talk about how he took a lot of joy and he felt like writing, especially on that show, was a very collaborative thing. So it makes sense that you said that he was like maybe the glue or one of the glue people on that writing staff, because it seems like he really took joy in like, this isn't my piece. This is my piece with Brian Doyle Murray and Garrett Morris, right? So I love that that's Zweibel's thought process, and especially at a show like SNL, Gary.
Yeah, he seems like one of those people that he just wants to make it better. He wants to make things funnier. He wants the show to be funny. He wants people to laugh. And if that means that your bit, if he can help you, punch up your bit a little bit, he's going to. And if you have notes for him, I think likewise, right? Like, I think that's part of the reason I think he liked working with Gilda so much, was because she would give stuff back to him. And in the immediate, it probably frustrated him a little bit, but he also felt like, oh, this is a collaborative effort here that we can put together. And I think that was really rewarding for him, from what I've heard and read.
Yeah, 100%. He's just that kind of guy. And I mean, that helped him out. Before we kind of talk about a lot of the great things, Zweibel is almost like a comedy that guy. For like a casual comedy fan would look at Zweibel and say, I know him from somewhere. But they can't quite pinpoint it. So he has done a lot of cool stuff after SNL. Is there anything that you want to maybe highlight on SNL before we move on?
On SNL, I think a few things, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about his Weekend Update work. What we didn't talk about was in the Mardi Gras special, right? All chaos happened and everything goes to crap in the Mardi Gras special. And there's the Jane and Buck are at the desk, and he is literally under the desk writing them jokes and handing them up over onto the desk.
Gosh.
In the live show, because
that's great.
Like, things just kind of fell apart and they had to fill time. So he's there handwriting jokes and handing them up to them. There's a Mr. Death sketch in season 3 that he wrote that I really enjoy. I think that's really funny. he wrote some of the Looks at Books sketches, a Not
Yes,
for Ladies Only sketch with Madeline Kahn, which is great. There's in season 5, I believe. It's season 5. There's the Lord and Lady Douchebag sketch, which he came up with the idea and then he wrote it with Franken and Davis. Again, like more of a collaborative piece. But he said that he came up with that idea working on the Beach Boys special in the summer of 76. And then they had to hold it until season 5.
Wow.
So,
very last episode of season 5, in fact.
Right. That's right. Because it's Buck Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, so he definitely made his mark throughout the show's first 5 seasons. My gosh, and I guess if you're one of the people who really loves the Pong sketches, with Davis and Franken and Davis, I believe Zweibel helped them probably punch stuff up or throw in little ideas or whatever on those as well.
Yeah, and I think that was a case of them being the young guys on the cast and the you guys are young, work together, figure it out. And they did. And I think it shows as the show progressed and they became more seasoned comedy writers, the 3 of them, you can really see that come through in their later work. So it's cool.
Right. And Zweibel made a lot of connections. People obviously really liked him. He co-created It's Gary Shandling's show.
I love that show. Yeah.
Yeah. Their sensibilities seem to really align.
Oh, right. I think I loved the Gary Shandling show when I was a kid, and I wasn't sure why. I didn't think it was just because his name was Gary and he had the wacky theme song.
You had a wacky theme song?
No, the show does. The show has a great
is that something
song.
You had in common? You just created a wacky theme song for yourself?
My wacky, yes. It's just, it's in my head constantly. It's kind of ridiculous. But you're right. The sensibilities of Gary Shandling and Alan Zweibel are so, I think they're so similar, but they're just different enough that they complement each other so well. Because Gary Shandling has a unique, distinct sense of humor and personality about himself. So speaking of Alan Zweibel, someone who seems to totally get that and then is able to kind of punch it up a little bit and work with Gary on this would work really well here and there. And he was the showrunner on that show. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that Gary Shandling doesn't seem to be the easiest guy to work with in some of those situations, right? Like from what I've read about him, he was, I don't want to say controlling, but he needed to be, yes, particular. That's great. That's a great word for it. And I think they had such a unique relationship that they could collaborate so seamlessly and make things work on a very unique, they took the sitcom format, the idea of a sitcom, and then kind of twisted it a little bit. I don't want to say they turned it on its head, but they definitely made it its own thing and a unique thing that for the time was very different.
Particular is a good word. That's one thing that I learned that word because that's what my wife calls me sometimes. She says I'm particular, probably in a nice way. So
yes, totally. Yes.
Do you know? And I didn't really look this up, but I know Zweibel had come back to the show every now and then and helped out. Gary Shandling hosted one of the more interesting, unique episodes in SNL history. I wonder if Zweibel helped out in any sort of way with that.
He did. He came back he was, I guess, a staff writer, quote unquote, for 3 episodes after he left. He came back and would help with different bits and stuff here and there and would help them, again, punch things up. But when Gary Shandling came on and hosted, he came back. Again, their relationship, Gary wanted him to be there and kind of help him along with it. There was an episode that Eddie Murphy hosted, and they asked him to come back in the Ebersol years, that episode. He came back and helped write that episode. And then Jesse Jackson hosted, and Lauren called Zweibel and was like, I need you here this week. He's like, oh, because Jesse Jackson and I are so close. Yeah, that makes sense. But he wrote for those 3 shows pretty extensively in those 3 episodes, apparently. Yeah,
I can just hear Lauren like, I think you could help. I think you can write in Jesse's voice. Alan, I think you know Jesse's voice. You can.
Yeah, you know that. Yeah.
the wacky ways of Lorne. It's kind of funny because that has about how Zweibel tells it with the samurai sketches. Is he said like, well, Lorne knew that I worked at a deli before this, and so he asked me to write Samurai Deli because I worked at a deli. Like that's just like the mad scientists, how people describe Lorne. So, but that's how kind of like as Zweibel says it. That's how he kind of got into writing the samurai sketches. If it weren't for that deli experience,
that's hilarious, right? I love that story. It's so good.
I know, it's so good. There is a connection, a couple really neat connections with Gary Shandling and Zweibel and Gilda.
When she guested on It's Gary Shandling Show. Yeah, so Gilda, when they were in production of It's Gary Shandling Show, Gilda was in remission from cancer at that time, or she was going through cancer treatment. There was a period where she was in remission and she wanted to do the show because she was so close with Alan. She also knew Gary Shandling and they had a relationship. And she apparently was very nervous to do it because she hadn't been on TV in a few years at this point, and she didn't know what to expect, but she felt like she really wanted to do this, like I said, for Alan. And when Gary's on set and he's doing his shtick on stage, Alan's behind the doorway with Gilda, and she was super nervous. And she's like, no one's going to recognize me. People aren't going to know who I am. And he's like, people are going to recognize you. You're fine. And then he walked out to Video Village and she knocks on the door and Gary opens the door and he just turns to camera and says, oh, look, it's Gilda. And the live studio audience there apparently erupted and just, according to Zweibel, it was something that he'll never forget in his life because the reception that she got, which he thought she was going to get, but she was nervous about and didn't know. And the fact that she did, it filled her with all of this energy at this really tough time in her life. And I think, again, he seems like such a wonderful man, a mensch who is just happy when other people are happy. And so when his best friend is just elated because people recognize her and they're applauding her, I think to hear him talk about it, he gets choked up in the interview that I watched where he's just like, it meant a lot to her and it meant a lot to me.
Well, that's such a beautiful full circle moment too, because we talked about earlier that Gilda helped a nervous Alan Zweibel at SNL. Flash forward 13 years later, and Alan's helping a nervous Gilda. Right, what would be her last television appearance.
Right.
So that's just like a kind of a beautiful symbiotic, like full circle kind of moment. I think that's so neat. I recently learned that the Larry Sanders Show kind of came about because of a project that never happened with Gilda. And that kind of blossomed into the Larry Sanders Show.
And I don't know that whole story. I only know bits of that story.
So they had developed, I think Zweibel and Gilda, they were going to develop a similar show where I think Gilda would play a character loosely based on herself who kind of hosted a late night show or a variety show or something, and it would be based on that host's life. So very similar, like almost like honestly, that's what the Larry Sanders Show is. So that never happened, and they kind of took that idea, and the Larry Sanders Show came out of it. Great show, but I think that's an interesting. I never realized that was that kind of show. That template for the Larry Sanders Show was intended for Gilda,
which would have been amazing. The Larry Sanders Show is another show that is so good and so wonderful. I love that show. To imagine that, and I think Gary and Alan kind of started it and then took it to Gilda, right? Like it was kind of like the three of them had worked on it a little bit.
Yeah. So Gary was a part of that initially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. But to imagine Gilda in that type of role, that would have been so much fun to see her in that role. That would have been great.
Yeah, for sure. That's just like a cool piece of trivia that I recently found out. One more person that Zweibel, an SNL related person that he really became like borderline best friends with, especially in their later years, is Larry David. So he and Larry David are super close. Zweibel's helped write on Curb Your Enthusiasm, or as far as how they write on Curb Your Enthusiasm, probably coming up with like beats for the stories. And he has one of my favorite appearances on Curb, Gary, that I go back to when I want to watch a Curb clip that makes me laugh. It's when Larry's in New York and he runs into a friend of his, played by Alan Zweibel, or not a friend, just like somebody who he kind of knows from L.A.
Hey, here's a thought. Let's go to lunch. Tomorrow?
I don't think so.
Okay, Thursday.
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, we don't really see each other in L.A. So why, if we're in one city all the time and we never have lunch in that city, why would we have lunch in the new city?
I see what this is.
We don't have lunch together
You're still
in
holding
LA.
a grudge because we didn't invite you to Joni's bat mitzvah. You'll never forgive me for that.
No.
I'm telling you, we sent it out. You were on the list.
I did get the invitation.
Yeah.
Yes, and I paid so little attention to it that I didn't even bother to RSVP because I shouldn't have been invited in the first place. I was offended that I was invited.
So let me get this straight. I'm
There's
going to
nothing
eat
to get
alone.
straight.
I'm going to eat alone tomorrow.
Why do you want to eat with me?
Because we never get a chance to eat in L.A.
Because we're not friends.
We're not friends because we never spend time together.
We don't spend time together because I don't want to spend time together.
So they just had this whole back and forth that just kills me every time. And you know, just like knowing Zweibel and Larry David, like that was just done out of just that they are such good real life friends. But that whole interaction just had me rolling.
Yeah. Oh, he's so good. I mean, he had some great appearances before he was even a featured player in the first few seasons of SNL. And he's an excellent writer. I think I've gone over that. But as a performer, there's just something so charming about him. I enjoy seeing him on screen. He plays the correspondent for the News of the Dead. And he plays a dead person, and it's still like, oh, that's funny. Like, he's funny. He's funny in the Spud beer commercial. He's in.
Right.
Like, there are all of these bit parts that he's done that he's great. He's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, and like I said, he's like a comedic that guy. Almost such like a familiar looking face, but casual comedy fans might not be able to pinpoint it right away. I love that about Zweibel.
Yeah. And he's worked on so many things that if you rattle off his credits, you're like, oh, yeah, he worked on The Late Show with David Letterman for a while. Oh, yeah, he wrote 700 Sundays with Billy Crystal. Again, like all of these people who have come in and out of his life seemingly are like, hey, I need help with this project. Will you work on this with me? Or let's work together. And he does. And he produces great stuff. And I think it definitely all started on SNL in the early years.
We are at the point now of the show where you were talking to the voters, listeners, the folks at the water cooler. So what should be the takeaway for those folks when thinking about Alan Zweibel's place in SNL history, Gary?
I think Alan Zweibel is unique among the early season writers in that he was able to work with everyone, and he was kind of like a chameleon in that he could work to other people's sensibilities. So he could work on Weekend Update. He could work on Samurai. He could bounce around and do these things and then take one of the best performers at the time and just write things for her that would elevate her as a performer, and she would elevate his writing. And you can definitely see in those collaborations the love and the respect for these, like you said, platonic lovers have for one another. I'm not going to sit here and say that like, oh, Gilda is Gilda because of Alan Zweibel. That's not true. But some of Gilda's best characters came out of her collaboration with Alan Zweibel. And he is someone who I think needs to be recognized, should be recognized for being that kind of glue in the writer's room who could work with everyone and kind of helped everyone make things better. He made things better in the first 5 seasons of Saturday Night Live.
So there's that. I really dug that. And I think that it's an extra special treat whenever we get to hear Thomas pull out his Lorne Michaels impression. So thanks for that, Thomas. Gary brought it as well. Just a fountain of information. Lots of great stuff there. The relationship with Gilda, his relationship with Larry David later on, which you played a great clip from. The guy is, he's got, if you remember back to Matt's Minutia Minute, he's got a tremendous resume. Will it include an SNL Hall of Fame nomination? I don't know. Writers have a tough time, and we'll dig into this a little bit more this week in the SNL Hall of Fame water cooler episode with Joe and Shari. But for now, let's explore that relationship that Alan had with Gilda Radner and revisit one of her more infamous Weekend Update characters, Emily Litella. Let's go to that now. This is an Alan Zweibel written piece performed by Gilda Radner.
And now here's this week's editorial reply by Emily Litella.
Thank you, Jane. Tonight's commentary is concerned with air solution. Now, what's all this fuss I hear about air solution? I don't... Oh, God.
What's so funny?
That was the worst joke I ever made. It wasn't even close.
I'm well aware of that. What's wrong with you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Curtin. I'm just not myself. I'm quite preoccupied.
Preoccupied with what?
Oh, my man. My man. Oh, my juices are all flowing. I'm all juiced up.
Who is this guy, anyway?
Tom Snyder.
Tom Snyder. You, Emily Litella, are in love with Tom Snyder.
What a hunk.
Well, to each his own. I guess he's appealing, but I'd never trust him. Besides, he's going to California anyway.
Well, don't talk about him that way. I love him.
Oh, come on. He's not worth it. Look at his hair. He'll only hurt you.
I love him. I love him. I love him. And where he goes, I'll swallow. I'll swallow. I'll swallow. He'll always be my true love. My true love. My true love. From now until forever. 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 I will swallow him.
Emily.
Swallow him wherever he
Emily.
goes. Where is it? Ah! What?
That's I will follow him. Not swallow him. Follow him.
Oh! Oh, that's different. That's very different. Tom, if you're watching, never mind.
That's our news tonight. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
There you have it. That is Gilda doing one of her more famous Weekend Update characters. I'm going to, just put it out there, hot take. I wasn't a big Emily Litella person, but Gilda transcends the role and really delivers. As did Gary Seath today. Please listen to the SNL Hall of Fame. Listen to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast, but listen to the Not Ready for Prime Time podcast as well. And do Gary a solid there. That's pretty much what I've got for you this week. Next week, we're excited to welcome Joe Piscopo to the ballot, and he will be nominated by his former castmate, Robin Duke. So we're real excited to listen to Thomas's conversation with Robin. That should be a lot of fun. If you need to connect with us, please do so at the SNL Hall of Fame at gmail.com. That's the SNL Hall of Fame at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. That's what I've got for you this week. Big thanks to Thomas and Matt. There's no show without them. They're great. Tune in later this week when I team up with Joe and Shari and we break down this episode and the most current episode of SNL, identifying the Hall of Fame and Hall of Shame moments that existed in that episode. So that's been a lot of fun so far to do that, and I hope you're enjoying it. Again, send us an email, the SNL Hall of Fame @gmail.com. That's what I've got for you this week. So when you walk out, as you walk past the Weekend Update exhibit, turn out the lights, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNLHOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.
Do podcasts and such.